I'm Africah Harrigan for Legit TV. Co-hosting with me tonight is Saida Harrigan, and together we will be interviewing lawmakers to find out what their opinions are on the governor's State of the Territory address. Joining me right now is Senator Clarence Payne. How are you tonight?
I am well tonight. How are you?
I'm pretty good considering that you're the chairman for the Committee on Health and Hospitals. The governor mentioned that some of the challenges are the financial struggles that the hospitals are facing. What changes can be implemented to alleviate this type of struggle?
Well, it wouldn't be resolved overnight, but I would like to see a discussion formulated in a territory where we have a discussion pertaining to a single payer health system. That is the original Obama plan that the Republicans brought back to where we have now the Obamacare. A single payer system will give Virgin Islanders the chance and the time to provide insurance for ourselves in our community. We can take our single payer system and provide cash incentives to the hospitals, where the hospital can go out and borrow to pay off its debts. And if I'm not mistaken, Louis Hospital is $70 to $80 million in debt. The hospital cash infusion that they are going to need cannot come from a general fund exclusively. So we have to think outside the box. Going to a single payer system will allow us to provide insurance for ourselves, make sure that each and every Virgin Islander have insurance so that when they go to the hospital would not have the burden of uncompensated care. It would also encourage a wellness program. It would also encourage all Virgin Islanders to get preventive and maintenance care. What is happening is people who doesn't have insurance go to the emergency room as its primary care physician. And as a result, it costs tens of thousands of dollars a year per person, which is causing a deficit at the hospital. The hospital doesn't have the cash flow necessary to take care of its vendors. For example, innovative medicine and all the other things, just WAPA. The Louis Hospital have practically stopped paying WAPA. So we have a lot of issues going on with funding, and I believe that a single payer system will give us the incentive to provide, and it would not provide, but give us the cash it needed for the territory and provide insurance for each and every Virgin Islander in the territory. So that's one way for us to correct these issues pertaining to the healthcare problems that we're currently having.
Despite the stricter laws and involvement of federal authorities, the crime in the Virgin Islands is still very much so on the rise. What additional strategies can be set in place to reduce this type of issue that we're having?
You know, a few years ago, the Virgin Islands had auxiliary police officers, and I thought that that program worked well. This where the officers that the department can bring in part-time officers who might be a school teacher, who might be a firefighter, who might be a marshal, and they can come in and work up to 30 hours a week to help bolster and support the police department, because the manpower that's necessary, I think that we have to take a look at where are we going as a territory. We need manpower. You could have all the great technologies necessary, but you need boots on the streets. And I think the auxiliary part can be an excellent resource going forward for the police department to consider.
Was there anything in the governor's speech that you would have liked him to mention that he did not talk about tonight?
I just wish that he didn't go towards a sour note towards the end. You know, I think that he started out optimistic, talking about all of the wonderful hotel projects that are coming online. He spoke about all of the wonderful educational initiatives that he implemented, but he should have stayed on that trend. We know that things are difficult, we know things are tough, but people doesn't need the chief to lend any negativity to an already difficult situation.
Thank you. Saida?
I'm here with Senator Junie Fricks Buckley. Senator, the governor did a lot to talk about public safety here in the territory and his efforts to combat that issue. We've already had 5 murders here in the territory for the year, and it's only January. I know that you're a member of the Crime Stoppers. You're actually a proponent of it, and you started it. What are some of the things that we can do to combat the crime here in the territory?
You know, I think one of the biggest challenges that the territory has seen ever since I've lived here, which is, 30 plus years, and it's the reason why we actually started Crime Stoppers 5 years ago, is people's reluctance to come forward and tell what they know. And, as the police say on a daily basis, they can't be everywhere all the time, and they have to have the community's, support and assistance in solving crimes. And because it's such a small community, and there's a fear of retaliation, there's a fear of retribution and different things, a lot of people simply don't want to come forward and be a witness. And so that's why programs like Crime Stoppers, where you can be anonymous, is really important. I was really pleased to hear in the governor's speech tonight that there is an effort to implement some crime reduction programs that have been done in other jurisdictions in the United States. I think that to ultimately reduce crime, it's going to take an effort of the entire community and all sectors of the community, to include, the churches, the civic organizations, the just all the stakeholders. And so I would look forward to being at the table for those discussions to see how we can do this with a holistic approach and not just be so reactive, which is kind of how we are right now.
So he already did mention some of these things that you mentioned, which is engaging the community to have a collaborative effort to combat the public safety issue. What are some of the other things that Crime Stoppers is doing to help?
Well, we just this month are celebrating our 5-year anniversary of having been in the territory, and so we have an ongoing commitment by all of our board members to do everything we have to do to remain a viable organization so that we can continue to be a tool for law enforcement, and not just local law enforcement, but also to federal law enforcement. So our commitment is that we're going to do anything we have to do to stay afloat, financially, and to keep our volunteers in place and continue being this resource for law enforcement.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Saida.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I'm here with Senator Sanders, Vice President for the 30th Legislature. How are you tonight?
Fine, thank you, ma'am. And you?
I'm pretty good, thank you. The government stated that our economy is the smallest that it has been in over a decade. What initiatives can be set in place to boost our economy?
Well, one of the things that he mentioned is the lack of collecting taxes, and I think that's very important. Given the fact that even the governor mentioned in his address that we're not doing a great job in terms of collecting taxes, I think we really need to boost up that program and go after those individuals that are not paying taxes before we even think about implementing a new taxes to the people of the Virgin Islands. It's to me, it will be a blow to the hardworking individuals here in the territory that we implement new taxes before we even collect taxes from those individuals who are delinquent in terms of reporting their taxes.
The government stated that personnel costs is one of the largest costs in the government. Do you agree with the governor, and do you foresee layoffs for fiscal year 2014?
I agree with him from that first point, but in terms of layoff affects not one person, it affects families. And remember, when you lay off a government employee, not only does he lose a salary, but he also loses health benefits, which is very important if they have children. I think on top of that, when you lay off people, you affect the retirement system. So I don't think it's something feasible. I don't think it's a route that we should go to. I think we should go back to the original statement that I made in terms of collecting taxes. I think that's the proper route to go to.
Is there anything in the governor's speech that he did not mention that you would have liked him to mention tonight?
Well, given the fact he did mention many other projects that are occurring, especially on the island of St. Croix, and I'm glad he mentioned that. But there was one aspect of the Pauli Joseph Stadium that he failed to mention. We brought a proposal a couple of years ago to build a permanent village setting next to the Pauli Joseph Stadium. And what that's going to do is that we're going to build a permanent stage so that we can bring back the blues and the jazz festival like we used to in the past. That is an excellent source of revenues, and it's something that we are looking forward to.
Thank you. Saida?
Senate President Sean Michael Malone, the government directly proposed that the two of you meet to discuss the 30th, he wanted the two of you to meet so that you could discuss the 50% budget deficit within 2 weeks of the budget hearing that you're going to be having in February. Do you think that this is something that is going to be helpful in the future?
Yes, well, he wants to meet with us 2 weeks after the February 18th Finance Committee meeting to discuss the deficit. And of course, we are no strangers to meeting. I've reached out many times, and so has he. So we have a pretty good relationship in coming together to discuss a number of the important issues that we are facing throughout this term. So it will be nothing new. And so I read, in fact, just yesterday, I wrote a letter to him seeking if he can meet with us tomorrow. But because I guess preparing for this, I did not get a response. And of course, tonight we heard when he'd like to meet. So that answers that question or the letter I sent. So yes, very interested in doing that to discuss some ideas. We have a few of our own, but I want to suggest that we could look at, for example, some ideas is to look at, I mean, I call it household economics. If you have less money coming in, you make adjustments. You probably eat food that you normally would not that you normally would not buy because you could afford more. You simply buy cheaper food. You reduce your travels, so you reduce gas, whatever it is that it would take to shave down those costs. And I think from the Virgin's government, we can find a number of opportunities to reduce some expenditures. Now, the governor is only looking at it from a macro point of view. He made a reference. He referenced minute items that don't amount to much. I disagree with that. I will continue to disagree with those statements. We've butted heads on that in the past. Cell phones and cars make a difference because then it just sends a signal of how you spend in other areas. It is not so much that you're spending a lot; it's how we spend. And if you find, I have a belief that if you can show me how you are managing small things, then you cannot manage big things. Just here in the legislature alone, we reduce vehicles. No senator has a car assigned to the office. As a result of doing that, maintenance costs have decreased. Repairs to mechanics that we usually, contract with have almost been eliminated. Gasoline costs have been reduced. So you had three additional categories of expenditures that were eliminated as a result of getting rid of one. Cell phones. $120,000 was decreased in our budget from eliminating cell phones, paid for by the senators, and staff who are designated to have them. Insurance costs gone, replacement of phones, and all the little things that are going on with that. Small, but that's setting a signal to me as president to look at storage, how much copy machines we're using. All of that added up to a surplus, in the black, of $170,000 in 2013. This approach should be taken across the government. And then you'll find some opportunities for reducing expenditures. The other part of the deficit, which is big, the macro point, is that, with the run monies. We'll know something in February. I'm confident that we're going to get that restored. So you're looking at maybe $30 million. What have we done before? $30 million deficits are nothing new. We've managed, and other states have managed, with deficits of that at that level of in the red. So a revised budget is usually what comes up as a solution. And then there's an allotment process that's controlled by the budget director. You just deal with what you need, not what you want or what you'd like to have. So it is, to me, solvable. I always believe that God never gives any one of us more than we can bear. We have the resources, the intelligence, and, in this case, the maturity to come together and look at the opportunities that exist to do more with less. And so that's how I'm very enthusiastic about tackling the deficit. I just didn't like how it was being postured before tonight's State of the Territory as though the Senate had done nothing. We had passed a number of revenue-generating measures, policies, not in just this body, but prior Senates, that they have failed to implement in a timely manner. Why am I still only hearing no RFPs are going up for Fort Christian when it's been like that for such a long time? And there were two authorizations and bond authorizations to fix Fort Christian. The most recent one was November of 2012. Yes, and I voted on that, and only now the RFP is going out. Are you going to blame the Senate for that? We did our job. We passed the appropriation. We authorized to go and float the bonds. That was done, but then we do not engage in the business of executing these projects. And that is just one of many examples of the same thing. I'm a sponsor of legislation back in I think the 28th legislature to create a DNA database bank and laboratory. That would have reduced our costs currently expended to send specimens off island for testing for crime and legal reasons, court cases and so on. Had we done that, started at Charles Harwood, my staff put together a very detailed list of references of federal grants and resources that could have been used without using any of our money locally to get that moving. Because while that's starting, then we could have gotten the other governments in the Caribbean to send their specimens here. That's a revenue generator, and at the same time, you cut those costs. So we'd have probably been yielding probably a surplus of $4 to $5 million. That and many other types of things like that we just don't do. So it's a combination of those things. So nonetheless, we are where we are. And then, of course, he vetoed the villa tax. Just think about it. I want people to listen to me very carefully. If we are generating, right now tourism gets about anywhere between $16 and $22 million in the hotel occupancy tax to promote the territory, and at 10% of the room rate, and the high season that may be anywhere from $400 to $800 a night, depending on what hotel you're staying in. And we could generate that. Imagine what you'd get from a villa that rents for $10,000 a week. Add 800 at the high end times 7. 8 times 7 is 50, that's $5,600. If that, and that doesn't happen all year round, because the rates go down during the slow season. But if you do a villa tax at 10%, which is usually year round for these villas, and there's quite a lot of inventory, condominiums as well, you would see that we, in a conservative estimate, yield $20 million. So these are some of the things that I just want to put on the record that the public needs to hear. One thing about this, Senator, and I'm proud to say it with all my heart and soul, I work. I am committed, dedicated, I work. I don't even know what time my day starts and begins sometime. I don't complain about it. This is my home. I work to make sure that I'm not going to cut corners. And so I have solutions, but we have to make sure that people are all pulling their own weight as well. You can't just leave it squarely in the Senate. The record is there. People, look on our website. Look at the number of bills, the captive insurance bill, the villa tax, EDC reform. I mean, a number of things. Bond authorizations that should be creating jobs and yielding tax revenue as a result of these projects being instituted. What can I tell you? That's my response.
I also had one more quick question for you. The governor, before the meeting here today, he pointed a lot of fingers at the legislature in terms of the $70.5 million budget deficit. The tone here at the State of the Territory address was really different. At first, it was very friendly and engaging, and patting you on the back. And towards the end of the speech, it was just like back to pointing fingers again. So, what do you think about that?
Well, I would say, it was for the most part conciliatory. He's reaching out. Olive Branch, at least, was extended to work with him to help solving the problem. No problem. I just don't. You see, to make sure that all leaders work together, you have to create an atmosphere for collaboration. And it didn't bode well before tonight that went down. So I think what the feedback has been from the attacks prior to tonight has now resulted in the governor having a conciliatory speech, a tone in his speech, which I appreciate. And that is how it should always be. You can't, the blink could go around the room 20 million times. You heard me just explain a number of opportunities the Senate have presented to this government, the number of authorizations, the policies that we have passed, that have not been properly or timely executed. But yet I don't go around complaining when agencies don't respond to senators for committee meetings or they're not forthcoming with information. We don't belly ache about those things. That's not going to get you anywhere, but that's what they like to do. And until we get rid of that, then we can work much more harmoniously together to solve the problem. I always believe in the truth will make you free, and the record is there. There's no need to twist it, turn it, flip it around. It is what it is. Just say the deficit is what it is, and I think we can solve this problem. Most of this is, again, related to the RUMCO over at the lower level. We know they're going to approve this. There's lots of indications that will be the case. It's just when. And I think it'll be done before May. We just have to know, in my mind, we're about $30 million roughly, and I think we can work with that through a revised budget or through the allotment process, working with them and discussing things that they may need to do away with, so that we can maintain the integrity of the retirement system in this rough period. Also, while WAPA continues to try to reduce these rates, they're still high. People are working with that. It's a tough year. It's a tough time for us.
All right, thank you so much,
You're welcome.
Senator.
You're most welcome.
Joining me is Senator Jeanette Milley-Young, Chairwoman for the Committee on Economic Development, Agriculture, and Planning. How are you tonight?
I'm doing wonderful tonight.
The governor spoke about the $70 million deficit shortfall. What are your suggestions to closing the deficit?
Well, remember, first of all, I want to say that I come in peace. You know, he spoke of dissension, and I just want to bring peace, okay? And second of all, I have to say there's 15 of us. And if everybody brings something, and it's just not just the 15 of us, he also has to suggest ways for us to close this, other than taxing our government employees over and over again. From my part, in the last session, we overrode a veto by the governor for placing employees at the tax collector's office to collect taxes. And we just couldn't understand that because it so happens that we had a researcher who presented at an economic summit that we hosted here at the legislature in 2012, which, by the way, the administration did not participate in. Within that research, we found that the presenter told us that we're leaving on the table about $20 million of taxes that should be collected by the villa owners of these villas that we have on St. John, on the east end of St. Thomas, and even on St. Croix. But we didn't include St. Croix. And so we're hearing this backlash from the administration that it doesn't exist. You heard from some of the senators who told the IRB director where to go look in the website. We have the gentleman who did the research, who is a property manager also, so he knows that he's paying and he knows of who's not paying, that he will volunteer, and we don't hear that often from the private sector, who will volunteer to work at the IRB office to train those employees how to collect those taxes. That is $20 million. If we continue to embrace these ideas, we can do it. I did hear the governor tonight state that he will be enforcing the tax collection. You know, this talk about sending people to jail or whatever, that doesn't bode well, right? But we want to make sure that those who should be paying pay, because they're not paying because nobody's coming knocking on their doors. That's all. Knock on their doors and get your money.
There were a lot of economic initiatives that the governor spoke about tonight. What is your take on that?
Well, sometimes what the governor himself has said is that some of these projects are revenue neutral. So it's not like they really spur a whole lot of money coming in. I happen to believe that it does, and I support them. However, this is the governor's last year, and so I would encourage the administration to spend a whole lot of more time finishing projects that are currently going on. I mean, some of these projects are causing business laws, such as the road project over at Mandela Circle, and sometimes they bring projects together and everything is happening at once. You have a lot of traffic jams. Businesses have had to close because of some of this over at Waco. You also have the situation with WAPA. And so saying so doesn't mean that it is so. Who feels it knows it. And so to say that things will be getting better with WAPA and what they're going to do whenever doesn't help anybody. It really doesn't. So we have to continue encouraging the growth of business that are more focused on greener technologies. And again, when we talk about saving money, I mean, he talks about perhaps sending people home, and that always touches me because what that will do is that it will further erode what's going on at GRS, because right now is one current employee, active employee, versus a retiree, and that doesn't pay for the retirees that are on the system, so we can't have that. And so when they talk about reducing the number of employees, I can't even begin to apply for that, Africa. You know why? Because while they have been reducing the number of employees, they have increased the pay for those who make the most. And so it doesn't work. You have to do both. You have to reduce the number of employees, and you have to reduce the amount that you're paying to that bucket.
Is there anything that the governor mentioned tonight or did not mention tonight that you would have liked him to talk about?
Well, I would like to know from the administration a little bit more specific detail as to how some of these major projects are working. As you have perhaps followed my record, I don't like to vote for a lot of borrowing, etc. But I did feel pressed to do so in November 2012 because you talked about police cars, you talked about education, the tracks, you talked about the library, you talked about the fort. That was in November 2012, and we heard in 6 months these things will be completed. The fort is still there, not open. It is 2014. The library, they're boasting about the library, but I don't know what activities happen in the library. I would like to encourage more use of the library. And while I say these words, I also want to let you know that I'm on board to work with the administration. I mean, with that said, because sometimes it's like, why are they continuing to argue with each other? And it has to be done because it's about checks and balances. So you cannot allow one party to say something and it be unchallenged if it's not correct. And so, again, I really appreciate the governor coming here saying that he wants to meet with us. I want to meet with the governor. He has submitted a series of economic development measures. Some of them have been preempted. The Senate president preempted him in a couple. I preempted him in a couple. He understands that. I've met with him. I've met with his team. Because despite all that goes on, we still continue to meet. And it has to happen. The public cannot afford for us to just be fighting. So we do meet. That meeting is going to take place on February 4th, right here in St. Thomas. So stay tuned. We do have things coming on, down the pike, and these proposals are for stimulating job creation. And so once we are able to bring more businesses in, we can stop talking about overtaxing, because the more businesses paying taxes, the less the burden on those who are already paying the taxes. So I appreciate the opportunity to weigh in. I thank once again the governor for being here. I think we were gracious hosts for him, and we will continue to meet each other halfway.
Thank you, Senator. Saida?
Delegate Donna M. Christensen.
Yes, good
You,
evening.
good evening. You've been our delegate for 18 years now. Could you talk to us a little bit about securing federal funding here for the territory? Has that proven to be difficult for you?
It has been perhaps more difficult in recent years, but we've been able to get funding. We've been able to increase our surface transportation money, which is roads, ferries, buses. Of course, with the sequester, we got a bit of a cutback, but we're hoping that now that it's been pretty much removed, that funding can go up. But that's a whole 5-year authorization. We've been able to greatly increase our Medicaid dollars, as the governor alluded to here tonight, which will allow our territory to cover many, many more people and give them access to quality health care. And we continue to fight for more funding dollars. But when we had earmarks, we always got earmarks. Sometimes we'd get more earmarks than some of our smaller states, just for the Virgin Islands, for wastewater treatment repair, for police, technology, and all of those kinds of things. So it's more difficult now, as we can witness by the difficulty in just getting the advance of our rump cover over, because I know Interior is one of those departments that's under very heavy scrutiny by our Republican leadership, and they're afraid to make a false step and be called on the carpet. But the person who's most nervous about it is leaving the office, and I'm hopeful that we will hear about that advance in the next week or so. And I'm cautiously optimistic for a favorable response, that we would get the cover over in advance of us passing the tax extenders, although I fully expect that we will pass tax extenders sometime in the first part of this year, and that it'll be retroactive as it generally has been. So the funding that we've been able to provide has been a help to the territory. You know, one of the things, as quiet as it's kept, the borrowing that was able to keep us from just having a total financial collapse was made possible by a bill that I passed when, I think it was during the Turnbull administration, that enabled us to have the authority. We were the last jurisdiction that did not have this authority to borrow for any public purpose and for operating expenses. So had I not passed that, we would not have had the ability to float those bonds. So I'm really, my staff and I work hard, and we're really glad that the work that we have done is paying off for the territory and allowing the government and agencies to provide better services.
Another thing, I'm glad you brought that up in terms of the territory being among the last to receive federal funding. The governor spoke a lot about the VINGN network that's being established. And our broadband was like the lowest in terms of
most
speed.
Underserved and unserved at a decent broadband speed, yes.
Exactly. So, what do you think that the VINGN network will do for us?
It opens, I sit on Energy and Commerce. So the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act that provided that funding came under my committee. I was on the subcommittee. So, I was very much involved in providing the broadband money nationally and trying to ensure that the Virgin Islands got their share. But it has been shown in community after community, when you have that broadband infrastructure, economic activity, educational activity, so many opportunities open for that community, and it enables us to grow an economy that we're really going to have to work very hard to grow. When you hear that our economy is 22% smaller than it was before 2008. We have a lot of work to do. That's a major challenge. But the broadband, I think, I'm sure, will play a big role in helping us to close that gap somewhat.
I'm glad you touched on education, because we heard the governor mention the parent university, which allows parents to be a little bit more interactive in terms of their students' academic achievements. Are there any more federal grants or anything like that we can look forward to in terms of what's going on in Congress related to education?
Well, we're a little behind on some of the things that we are responsible for. For example, the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which is critical to the territory. So in terms of grants, there are some grants that we're entitled to that we've never used. There are others that we are working hard to make sure that we're included in. I noticed that the governor made reference to an early childhood program and so I will go back to work and make sure and look at that and see if we're not included, and work with him to have the territory included, because that early childhood issue is critical for us. I understand that our children are going to school, entering school, deficient in at least, I think it was 6 key developmental areas. So we need, if they start out deficient, it's going to be very hard for them to catch up. So we really need to focus on early childhood. So I think that's a great initiative that he and the First Lady have taken on. But we always look for grants. The Department of Education gets formula funding, and we're glad that the budget this year did not hit Title I very hard. I think it may have reduced some of the individuals with disability funding. The Race to the Top that we were not included in has been cut significantly and specifically to go into early childhood education. So we'll be looking to see what new grants come available. And I think one of the things that we have not had in the territory for a long time is a grants management office. I think that is really key, to look at grants, to make sure that the grants that we send off are sufficient, adequate, to help to monitor how we spend our grant dollars and implement the programs. I think that's a key office that needs to come back here.
I think that's a wonderful opportunity. I hope everyone's listening to that. Thank you so much, Delegate.
Thank you.
Joining me is Senator Craig W. Barshinger, Chairman for the Committee on Energy and Environmental Protection. How are you tonight?
Very well, Africa. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Although the governor mentioned energy saving measures such as solar bio projects as well as wind projects and biofuel and projects as well, residents still complain about the high WAPA bills. Is there an immediate short-term plan in effect that will help to decrease the water and utility costs for consumers?
The legislature has a plan, but the governor was very light on the electricity issue. The single most crippling force in our economy is the exorbitant cost of electricity. And the low reliability is also an issue, especially for the businesses, because they need the current to be on all the time that they're open. So I think that if the governor, who showed some willingness to work with the legislature, will be open to it, we can present him what we've been advocating since the summer, which is a reduction of the heat rate to 9,000 BTUs per kilowatt hour. It's technical, but the governor has vetoed our attempts to regulate that. Guam uses half the fuel that we use to burn the same amount, to make the same amount of electricity. So we have an immediate solution, because as soon as you make the switch to more efficient plant and equipment, you immediately can borrow against that choice. It would take 2 years for the equipment to be online, but Senator Millen Young proposes we borrow against that once we make the decision. It's really up to people, though, and the governor doesn't seem to be willing to make that. He talks about it, but we're not going to fix the electricity crisis until people tell us as legislators that they want it, and the governor hears them. The governor is in charge of the Water and Power Authority. He appoints the directorate and the boards, and they're really doing their own thing. The legislature is ready, the people, I think, are ready, and the governor maybe is getting ready. So we have a solution. We can actually have the LEAC in 2 years. We can.
Let's talk about the budget crisis, which was a major topic throughout his speech tonight, balancing revenues and spending, the $70 million shortfall. What is your opinion on that?
Well, luckily, this is a solvable problem. All we have to do is direct the governor, as we have told him in discussions, to collect the $240 million of outstanding taxes. He said, well, I can't get all of that, but certainly he can get some of it. If you take the $70 million shortfall and you add to that, or you subtract from that, the $40 million in rum cover-over extension, then we are very close to the number we need to be. He can certainly collect that. We are absolutely opposed to raising any new kind of taxes or implementing an 8% pay cut, which is a form of tax for Virgin Islanders, because that slows the economy. What we need to do is to keep people working and being paid so they're spending money, and we need to collect taxes fairly and equitably. There are times when times are booming, we don't look too close at where the taxes are going. But when we're all in a lifeboat together, we all have to pay our fair share. And that is something that the governor has been reluctant on the tax collections with villa rentals. He's vetoed legislation that we had to override, and he needs to go for that. We said, collect those taxes from the villas that are owned by stateside owners and aren't paying any hotel taxes. We need to do that. We also have directed him to do other collection revenues in the building industry, for instance, where only about 15 or 20% of the general contractors are even paying taxes. This is outrageous. He needs to collect those taxes, and as opposed to raising other taxes. I heard good things from him tonight, as if he's now coming around to realizing that we need to do it. We can do it, and if we focus on actually measurable outcomes, I think that the governor will be successful in his last year because he didn't spend his time blaming the legislature as much as reaching out to the legislature tonight. And I was pleased by that.
On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest, how do you rate the governor's speech and why?
Well, Africah, I would give him about a 7 on a scale of 1 to 10 for form. It was polite. It was inspiring. He did mention some achievements. However, as I went through my book, I wrote down the letter F every time he talked about something that was future-oriented. And about 80% of what he said was future-oriented. Very good for a governor giving his first State of the Territory address. No good for a governor who's been in office for 7 years. He needed to have 80% achievements and 20% things he's going to do in his last year. He's relying on campaign-style reporting and saying, this is what I'm going to do. The St. John School, he's had 7 years to get that underway, and we still don't have a concrete plan on how to use the Hammer farmland on St. John. And the Julius E. Sprouse School is falling down. These are the kind of things that we don't have time to go through each one of them, but I gave him an F on every time. F for failure and F for future. That will be for the next governor to call and say in his or her next term what they're going to do. So I'm afraid, as far as on achievement, I'd have to give him a 3 on a scale of 1 to 10.
Thank you, Senator. Saida?
Senator Alicia Chucky Hansen. The governor spoke about his alternative energy initiatives on St. Croix. And he said that they would deliver guaranteed lower costs to members of the territory. What do you have to think about that?
Well, I believe one of the areas that I heard him discuss was the arrangement that WAPA has with Vital to, in fact, go into propane, the conversion from the type of energy we utilize today to propane. Now, it is easy to say that we're going to have a reduction. That could be possible if they were not carrying up the power every month, well, almost every month. Because by the time they continue to carry up the power, and speak of WAPA, the 30% is going to be meaningless, okay? So that's something that has to be addressed. The other areas of concern that I have was his request that we revisit that 8% salary cut on government employees. I cannot support that. And I will not support it, not because I just simply want to say I'm not going to support it, but because I know we don't have to. There are various alternative measures, in my opinion, that we can do in order to prevent further cutting our employee salaries. You see, we have to take the attitude that we cannot continue to bail the big guys while we keep putting the pressure on the backs of the smaller guys, all right? You have Seaborn that owes millions of dollars to this government, and it's okay. Seaborn has a monopoly on our sea base. They're the only ones that can use it, although they owe the Port Authority monies. So we want to go after people, the average men and women. I don't believe in that. I believe that government should be balanced. I believe that the internet gaming, after all that it has gone through, it has had the act, it had the opinions after the act passed that some said it could not be possible to carry out the law in the Virgin Islands because of some federal statutes. But the last opinion supported even the federal opinions that internet gaming can be proceeded with in the United States Virgin Islands. Knowing this, and what results we can get from internet gaming, it's time to roll. The law is there already. Let's get it going because that will wipe out the $70 million plus provide us with a surplus. So, am I going to go back to cut people's salary? I mean, people just can't keep up. Everything is going up and their salary is getting smaller or staying the same. And so that's a big no-no for me, and I will fight against it. The other areas of concern that I think the governor was very good at is his invitation for the executive branch and the legislative branch of government to meet together. And it's something that I've asked the legislation, this body, to do. Let us meet, lock the door, stop the clock, and work around the clock to make a consensus on the various things that has to be done and can be done. We have legislators that have various proposals. I have my own, for example, taxing passengers that come in right here into St. Thomas and depart to the British Virgin Islands. We can get instant monies from that area. What about the millions of dollars that leaves every day to foreign countries? That needs to be taxed. And we're losing opportunities. We need to reduce the gross receipt taxes. So give a breather to business people and they will be able to generate, once they are able to cover their expenses, they'll be able to also pay more comfortably their taxes. And that whole system with gross receipts needs to change anyway. They're paying up front whether they make money or not. It is just a bad system. I think the moratorium on gross receipts, so to avoid the penalties and interest, needs to take place. That will generate instant monies, because then the penalties and interest at times can be higher than actually what they may owe. And the government is supposed to be here to facilitate. They're not forgiving their taxes, but you're giving them the opportunity to pay it because they're struggling with WAPA and the LEAC and nothing that's coming in. People getting laid off. They're not spending as much, but they still have to come up with the light, water, and payroll. We have to alleviate that burden of our people. And we need to take all those developments that we have on the shelf. The governor is correct when he said that the local government has done everything they had to do for the permits for various hotels and casino development. Yes, all the local permits are in place. The government has not hold back anything, but care what? There are other areas of concern. We need to bring in these developers and ask them what the hell we need to do as a government. And let's do it. And get the ball rolling so our people can get to work. Get our people to work. If they're not working, there will be more and more. I don't care what they do or how many police officers they bring or what kind of technology they bring. If people are not working, crime will increase.
Such a good point, Senator. Could you talk to us a little bit about what people who lost their jobs during the Hovenza shutdown can look forward to? I didn't really hear the governor talk too much about it in his last speech. He mentioned that there would be initiatives for people who lost their jobs. What do you think that the Crucian people can look forward to?
Well, actually, hope. That's why I voted for that last Hovensa agreement, because there was a need to have hope for those that have left and hope for those that remain, that something will happen rather than nothing. I was disappointed that the governor did not expand on the civil penalty that I worked so hard for, and which I committed my last vote on the Hovensa issue as part of the conditions for my vote. And that is the $4.8 million for the civil penalty. Now, we got the $4.8 million agreement within the governor's side and my side, and I convinced my colleagues and they supported me. However, telling us tonight that they have spoken to the Department of Justice and also to EPA is not sufficient. I need to know if documents have been filed. I need to know to what extent or what response after the submittal, when we expect a final resolution on it. I can't just drop it or just be satisfied with what was said, because it is necessary. Everybody knows that that's my issue. Everyone knows that I fought the government of the Virgin Islands for at least 3.5 years, where they were insisting that those monies had to be for a supplemental program. And I said, no. I have in writing by the administrator of EPA from Washington and New York that that civil penalty, according to federal law, the state, destination, Commonwealth, or in our territory can do whatever we want with our portion. They just take half for themselves for their senators to decide how to spend that money. We decide how we want to spend that money. One man in our government, just one man, decided they're going to transfer the penalty back to Hovensa to decide what to do with those funding. I've never heard worse. But now we passed that, we are beyond that, but we need also, because I need to help our hospital and St. Croix. When we hospital needs the money, they are ready to collapse. And therefore those civil penalty funding can be utilized for that purpose, and also for the transportation for our senior citizens. So it is significant that we get those issues in place. We can put people to work. We can put people to work. We must put people to work if we move aggressively on the projects that we have pending. Okay?
Thank you so much, Senator. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Fish is mine. Nice to see you.
He's on. He's on.
Joining me is our Majority Leader of the 30th Legislature, Senator Donald Cole. How are you tonight?
How are you, Africa? I'm doing well. Give thanks.
I'm doing pretty good. Now, the GERS, $200 million unfunded liability. The governor been in office for 8 years. Do you think that problem should have been resolved by now?
It's an interesting question. Excellent question. The GERS situation is something that is vexing, very vexing. And as the governor pointed out in his speech, if we lose the GERS system, it's $200 million coming from the general fund. I don't see the funding source. I believe that years ago, that should have been attacked. Should have been attacked. It should have been addressed years ago. The governor is on his way out, and he's saying we must do it now. The task force did their job. It came before the 29th Legislature. The task force, there was a bill in the 29th Legislature to deal with GERS. Years ago, the legislature authorized $600 million in bonds to deal with GERS. That never happened. That authorization is still on the books to go get $6 million. I believe that that situation should have been addressed long ago. We have to address it, because if we don't, the territory and the retirees who are out there right now are going to be in serious trouble, and this whole economy will be in serious trouble. But I believe that GERS system should have been addressed years ago. Okay? We have to do it now.
The $70 million shortfall. How do you suggest the first branch of government and the executive branch of government work to resolve these issues?
It has to be a collaborative effort. The governor has said that we need to sit down and we need to speak about it. We have to. But let me explain about 3 issues that I believe can speed it up. Hovensa. The legislature have authorized the governor to enter into a new agreement with Hovensa. And that agreement forego $7 million in taxes. I supported that the first time around, and I supported it again. What I want to see happen is that the governor meet with these people who are going to purchase Hovensa and move this thing forward as quickly as possible. If it happens within that package and the sale, we get a percentage of that sale. We're talking about maybe upwards of $40 million. So let's assume the governor does what he has to do. The companies come together. By June, we get $40 million. That's a $40 million less that we have now. So I'm asking the governor to go forward, put the pressure on, and make sure this deal comes to fruition, and comes to fruition as quickly as possible. The other thing is that early last year, the 30th Legislature voted to pay $14 million back to the federal government for an issue that took place with the bonds under the previous administration, where the advisor to that administration basically alleged made some mistakes. And I know those people had to have had insurance. That's $14 million. We asked the governor to make sure he go out and collect that, go back after them and make sure that they get that $14 million back to put into our treasury. We're hoping that happens. It has to happen. And if it does, that's $14 million. So 40 plus 14, that's 448 and 415. That's almost 50 something million dollars, correct? We're done, we have 70. The governor said he wants to cut the deficit in half by 50%. So there are 2 basic entities that we can deal with. The other thing is taxes on the street. Upwards of $150 million of uncollected taxes on the street. We have asked the governor and the IRB director to go out and collect these taxes. And let us know how much of those taxes are collectible, how much, and the time frame in which they can be collected. Once we're armed with that information, then we know that in 6 months we can collect $10 million. Let's go forward and do that. Put the revenue officers on the street, let them go out and collect the taxes. We are asked to increase taxes on an overtaxed population. Well, if you increase the tax, are we going to collect the tax? Because we're not collecting what's out there. And I know there's difficulty. Some of those taxes might not be collected. Businesses have gone out of business. Individuals might have died and all of that. Some of them might be tied up in probate. But we need to know how much of it is collected. If we can collect $10 million, our deficit is reducing. So these are the issues that I want to see the governor deal with. One of the other issues too, income taxes. Not income tax, property tax. We authorize the governor to collect 2 property taxes in the fiscal year. The first set of the property taxes haven't gone out as yet, and we're in the second quarter of the fiscal year 2014. We're talking about if they go out, 25 million. If both go out, that's up to another $50 million. So here we have taxes on the street that needs to be collected. And we're asking the governor to be as strong as possible and go forward and collect those taxes.
Referencing the $70 million shortfall once again, do you foresee layoffs for government employees for fiscal year 2014?
Well, there are basically 2 ways that we balance a budget. We're either going to get revenues in or we have to cut expenditures. The highest percentage of expenditures goes with paying salaries for government employees. I don't foresee that it happen because again, the governor and the executive branch and legislature has to be collaborative in how we're going to attack the problem. I don't want to see it happen. Also, the 8%. When I came into office, we placed the 8% back in there. There was a law on the books that said the 8% was going to come back. The governor wanted to forgo that 8% for this fiscal year coming up. We decided we're not going to do it because that's 8% that was taken out of the economy of the government of the Virgin Islands. We put 8% back in there. The taxes that came off of that 8% is a part of the budget. So we basically have to deal with that. The other issue with that, we have the cover over money from the federal government. We're asking the governor, and he has been negotiating, but he needs to continue to be forceful and explain to the Department of Interior the predicament and precarious situation that we're in. We have lobbyists in Congress who we pay money for. We have lobbyists who lobby on the Democratic side, lobbyists that lobby on the Republican side. We know there's a Republican House that is in control. The Ways and Means Committee is controlled by Republicans. We need to get our lobbyists who are on the Republican side to go down and explain to these people the predicament we have. The delegate to Congress is a Democrat. She can deal with her Democratic people. We're Democrats. But the lobbyists who have Republicans on this side, they need to go down and we can bring them in. Because half of that money that created the deficit is the cover over money that we haven't received. If we can get that extender go forward, guess what? We're on the road again. So those are the things that I see we can do going forward.
Is there anything that the governor did not mention in his speech that you would have liked him to talk about?
Well, what I would like him to talking about it is just talking about it. I must say over the years I would want to commend the governor in bringing in a new revenue stream to the territory, which was Diageo. It was a new revenue stream. The governor had a plan where he wanted to use portions of that to deal with GERS. So he must be commended for that in that form of governance. But I'm saying not collecting the taxes, I believe, is one of the greatest concerns that we have. And the governor has, like I do, I'm up for election if I run again for another 11 months. He has 11 months going forward. So talking about things, I want to see action, enforcement. Collect the taxes, enforce, and we'll be able to sit in a good place.
Thank you, Senator. Saida?
Senator Diane Capehart, you're the chair of the Committee on Government Services and Housing. Correct. The governor, in the end of his speech, made a call to action regarding GERS. Now, GERS is one of the best retirement systems in the world. What do you think we can do to bring it back to the green?
Well, I think that GRS has already started with public-private partnership, and I think we need to continue doing that. I think we need to think about more investments. I think that we need to start thinking about private industries coming in and joining the GRS. I think that would help us tremendously. And when we start thinking about laying off people, that is going to have a serious effect. That's should be the last resort, because with that, that's going to have serious impact on GRS. So that would be the last resort for me to even thinking about laying off people. So I think, looking at us going and getting more businesses to join GERS can help us tremendously.
Now, in the beginning of the State of the Territory address, the governor said that the 8% cut across the board wasn't his idea. He said that it was something that he was urging you against, not you, but the legislature in general. Now, towards the end of the speech, he blamed the legislature. What do you think about that?
Well, I have to say that the 8%, we all know by law it had to be reinstated. Now, in the 30th Legislature, the governor asked us to extend it. And because of the people of the Virgin Islands already going through such hard economic and financial hardship, it was no way that we can, in our right mind, even think about adding more hardship, because you have people who already have to cut corners. How am I going to pay my WAPA bill? How am I going to pay for food? How am I going to live? And they were really looking for this 8% restoration. So, we thought that we would start looking at other revenues. We've met with the governor, we've met in caucus, we've met with the non-majority members, with all of us trying to be creative, how we can generate revenues. And some of us came up with some very good ideas. For instance, like the condominium, the hotel taxes, anyone who has any kind of home that they rent out to individuals that come here as snowbirds or whatever, they're not taxed. So that's something that's been done. Also, you have some of my colleagues, as I said, came up with very interesting bills. I had a property tax bill that it got vetoed, and because of the governor saying that there was something already in place at the lieutenant governor's office, so I kind of yield on that. But I think that we've been very creative coming up with solutions. I really look forward in the next 2 weeks to see what other solutions we can come up with, because I'm happy that the governor didn't have so much of a name blaming of state of the territory, even though I have to say that he mentioned some of us who voted no were in opposition of the sale. I think that was very incorrect information. I wanted Hovensa to be sold, but I was not comfortable with the agreement. So I just want to make that known, because it was on the record that some of us who opposed it were not in favor of the sale. I'm up to this date, I'm very in favor of the sale, but I wasn't comfortable with the agreement. So I just want to let that be known. So I'm really looking forward to seeing a buyer for Hovensa. I thought the governor would let us know today who that buyer is, but he obviously doesn't have a buyer. But I'm sure there are potential people who are interested, and I'm really looking forward to that, because, with that has impacted our economy tremendously. We've had people leave. A lot of restaurants, they've been impacted, even though the biggest challenge for St. Croix, the Virgin Islands, is our energy problem. I'm glad that he mentioned also about, the changing of fossil fuel, our total dependence on fossil fuel, that we're going to be using propane, and also the solar panels that would be involved at different sites on St. Croix. I know it's also going to happen on St. Thomas. So I'm really looking forward to that. I can see relief for the people with that. So, there were some positive things that came out. I'm very hopeful for the Paulie Joseph Stadium. St. Croix, we need a big boost. It's like, we need infusion of cash in our economy. We need the hotels. We need the restaurants back. I'm looking for Paulie Joseph Stadium. I'm looking also for the hotels that are there on the backbone, that they're having some permitting challenges. I'm really hoping that the governor would work even with the federal government to make sure that those NOAA permits are processed also on a timely manner, because those are some of the big things that's pending for some of these projects. He talked about streamlining, but that's more on a local level. And that, even though that's very important, we have a lot of projects that pending due to federal permits. So I think we need to work on that also. He talked about the transshipment port. St. Croix, is my home. I have to think of what potential economic development that there is. We have the Panama Canal, which is going to be expanding at least by 2015. And so St. Croix is in such a strategical place. And I'm glad to see that, the economic development and renaissance with the public-private partnership, they're working together, and the governor, so we can have this. This would be a great boost for St. Croix. But I'm also very concerned that we need to look at, when we talk about tightening our belts, the judicial needs to do this. The executive branch need to do this. The legislature, the 30th Legislature, has done it. I mean, you all know we drive our own vehicles, we use our own cell phones, and this has impacted tremendously where there's been big cost savings. So I understand that even though it may be a little bit, every little bit counts. And I think when we're here showing an example that we are tightening our belts, he needs to also make sure that the executive branch is doing it. And the judicial branch needs to also do this. I'm looking forward to the 2-week meeting where my colleagues and I, we would be able to come up with some creative solution before we can start taxing individuals, taxing Virgin Islanders, before I don't want to continue seeing the richer getting richer and the poor getting poorer. Not me. So before we start thinking about 8% restoration again, before we could start talk about income tax surcharge, this is on the back of the people of the Virgin Islands. I cannot be an elected official and see that as the answer right about now. I think we have 15 creative minds. We need to get together and we need to put our differences behind and say, let's work together. We have a very short period of time to do this, and I think we can do it. I think with creativity, it can be done. So I'm really looking forward to that. There's so many things that, the governor touched on, and I wish he could have expanded a little more on certain things and be a little more detailed, but that wasn't the case. But I have to just commend him for not putting the 30th Legislature for all the blame. And I'm looking forward to a more successful 11 months that we have.
Thank you so much, Senator. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Saida. Joining me is Senator Myron Jackson, Chairman for the Committee on Culture, Historic Preservation, Youth and Recreation. How are you tonight?
I'm doing well.
Wonderful. Now, the governor did mention the revitalization of downtown Charlotte Amalie, as well as the revitalization of the boardwalk in Christiansted, as well as other projects in Smith Bay. Do you think those projects are moving fast enough, or are you satisfied with the pace of the projects?
I'm not satisfied with the revitalization efforts. Of course, this is a second term. This has always been an area of particular concern, revitalization. Of course, at the end of the day, you have to recognize, yes, that funding is necessary. But the efforts of the enterprise zone, for example, with the revitalization during his administration, has been on the move with town plans. But there again, in Charlotte Amalie, we have the downtown revitalization and some of the developments. Of course, some of these projects span several administrations and are going to be completed or in the process of going into another administration, like the Rachel Francis Square, the Market Square, which is still not opened, and the construction for the uncovery for the archaeological remains that are in the process. But the square itself could be reopened at this time and allow the farmers and those vendors to return to that particular location, freeing up the Emancipation Garden area for the taxis during Saturday, which is also having an impact on the tourism product. The town of Frederickstead, there was not much discussion in reference to the plans for revitalization efforts for the town of Frederickstead. And Christiansted was just a mention. Of course, the marina was also mentioned, and the boardwalk improvements that are underway or have been near complete. But those are particular areas, especially as we approach the 2017 centennial and in the preparations for our towns and the economic revitalization of our towns, which are big economic factors in terms of our economy and likewise dealing with our blight and the social issues of the territory.
Let's talk about the education system. He mentioned that a lot of incentives and initiatives that were geared towards improving early childhood education. But what more can be done to improve the education system throughout the territory?
Well, you know, that's a big area, and we could be here all night talking about education. I think in sitting on that committee and our engagement over the last months in reference to the concerns, are varied. And education has so many facets. You have the federal, you have the territorial overlay. We have school plans that require a substantial amount of money. And in fact, are we spending money, good money and bad? Of course, we need school infrastructure, but at the end of the day, it requires the funding necessary to do so. Are we receiving the funds or the results back from the investment made in our children in terms of the dollar number that is per child in the territory? And some will say no. So we're looking for better results and likewise performance of our teachers. And I commend the teachers of the year that have been selected, and they were here with us this evening. And likewise, the area of cultural development, the cultural education office has been closed in St. Croix, and there was no mention of the revitalization of that entity. Of course, we put some funding in the 2014 budget, which met some objection in terms of the percentage that should be used in cultural education and engaging our children so that they knew who they are and their culture and their history. History is another component in the curriculum that we've been waiting for the longest while, and other initiatives in terms of getting our text manuals and the Board of Education in terms of it, likewise working with the Department of Education in this regard. Those are areas that are essential and important in a child's experience and the wholesome education of our children in the territory.
Was there anything that the governor did not talk about that you would have liked him to address tonight?
Well, in areas, for example, revitalize it. Well, when you say that, let's look at the prevention areas of our youth. We talked about crime when we talked about the implied the youth population engaged. I would like to have really also hear about the requirements for the detention center in St. Croix, the Youth Rehab Center, YRC. I've had the opportunity to visit that particular facility, and plans were in this administration for the construction of a new facility. We should have gotten a status on that, and likewise, if we were moving forward there again, of course, the funding that was put in place, or at least the drawings that were prepared for that particular facility, is on the back burner. But we need responses in terms of the condition, the poor condition. The other day, heavy rains, the entire facility was flooded, and it needs attention. There was other area I would have liked expansion on our area of energy crisis. He made mention of some of the successes his administration has put in place in terms of moving forward. But at the end of the day, how we are going to address those particular issues, and of course my colleagues and the majority have been working in various pieces of legislation to look at various aspects of energy and the crisis that we're faced with and bringing costs down. Of course, yes, it's a monumentous task in putting all of the elements, but if we're going to have economic growth, likewise, we need to look specifically of how we reduce that cost. And he gave some examples in his speech in reference to what they have been doing. I would have liked to see some more discussions in the economic growth and preparation of 2017 and the benefits that can be derived from the centennial and our preparation. He did not mention anything about naming the commission, which I know that he plans to do some very shortly. But in January of last year, we were supposed to receive at least a budget to start beginning what is necessary. The discussions on the opening of Cuba, for example, may take place this year in terms of relaxing many of the restrictions. And as we approach 2017, you can't wait till 2016, which should be part of a continuation. He did mention the European travel market, and that's an area that we really should pay attention to, and also the export of our products. And I know rum is a particular area of interest in the European market, that they can get cruise and rum. And Diageo or Captain Morgan is available, but for the most part, even when the Department of Tourism does trade shows, they can't find cruise and rum in especially Denmark. And that's an area that we could look at as an expanded market. And I know that there are particular requirements and restrictions, but when we talk about export and the possibilities of our product, I think that's an area that we could enhance.
Thank you, Senator. Back to you, Saida.
Senator Tregenza Roach, what were your impressions of the State of the Territory address this year?
I had a lot of mixed reactions. I think that there were more details that I would have liked to see in the agreement. I want to be mindful that the governor is a public servant, and this is his last State of the Territory address. And so I would like to give him a thank you, for his service to the people of the territory, because sometimes it's a thankless job. But I wanted more detail. And I was concerned about the characterization of certain things. One of those is the Hovenza refinery and the role of the government of the Virgin Islands in its sale. The governor mischaracterized in his statement the position of those persons who did not vote for the agreement. And they were not opposed to the sale. I was not opposed to the sale. None of my colleagues who voted no, none of them was opposed to the sale. We simply felt that the agreement that had been negotiated was not in the best interests of the Virgin Islands, that we could have done better in terms of an agreement. And the knowledge was there that the legislature had never been a party to those terms. We were presented those from the onset. And so to characterize it as people being opposed to the sale of a private asset is to really minimize the position that those persons took. And I thought that was unfortunate. I also thought that if the governor got the agreement that he requested in November, it's November, December, January, we're going to February, it calls for a 1-year sales process, right? 3-4 months into it, we ought to know more about what is taking place with the sales process. And so those ideas about when we sell it and all the benefits that can accrue from selling it, those to me are too vague to have people rely on with regard to such a significant asset in our community. In addition to that, I was also very concerned about how the governor represented the healthcare situation in the territory. We are left with an idea that he's going to expand Medicaid. Access to Medicaid relies on income. Income is a significant determinant in whether you qualify for Medicaid. Even if we expand the Medicaid program, it still leaves tens of thousands of persons in the territory uninsured. And this document, as long as the governor went on, made no reference to those persons. And I'm certain that they're not going to be covered under the Medicaid expansion. It's similar to when we got the healthcare package for the government workers of this territory. We got it the day before the present policy was to expire. Ultimately, a set of the retirees were left out. We had to amend it just recently to address that. And so, these representations are made that make the situation look more concrete or more hopeful than it is with regard to a particular problem. I'm also very concerned about the approach to the government employees' retirement system. The governor did send down the recommendations of the GERS task force, and his letter that accompanied, the correspondence that accompanied that package, suggested that the legislature should implement all of the requirements. Now, what is the role of the legislature if it is simply to enact all of the recommendations of a particular task force on such a significant element of our economy? When you talk about laying off people, when you talk about adverse personnel actions, you make people fearful and they stop spending. And that contracts your economy, the very economy that you're trying to build. Social security. The same issue has been raised with Social Security. How many people are working to support the persons who are on Social Security? It's the same issue with our retirement system. If you reduce the numbers of persons who are working, you reduce the number of persons who are actively supporting the people who are receiving retirement benefits. And so you have to approach reductions in your workforce very carefully because they have an impact on several elements. There was a point in which the governor spoke about education. He spoke about early childhood education, an approach which I support. But he made references to using some funds from, I think, a tax litigation to support early childhood. I think that's a good initiative, but that requires legislative action. It's not something that the governor can accomplish by himself. And when you come along and you're talking about vagaries, again, we throw in something about a new school on St. John. Many of the residents of St. John have advocated for a high school. Is that what we're getting? Is that the approach, or are we putting it in this vague terms of a school for St. John? There are other elements. The references to the Government Development Bank. The IDC or EDC people who've come here have talked about the reluctance of local banks to invest in our local economy, and that they have been trying to meet with them to get them to look at how they approach lending monies to local people. Just changing the name of the entity or fusing other entities together doesn't address the problem or solve it the way that it has been presented to us and described here. So I think you have to be careful that you don't allow people to walk away thinking the picture is more rosy than it is, and you have done more than you have done with regard to particular actions. I am in support. I think a lot of businesses are crying about the gross receipts tax, but I'm not sure that a sales tax is what is the answer, especially with our residents who already pay very high costs for products in the local economy. We have to approach it carefully and balance it against whether we have done sufficient to collect the revenues that are out there that are due this government. And I don't believe that we have. If we're talking about noticing that businesses are making their transactions through St. Martin or Alaska, we've noticed that before. There's no mention of an action that goes with that concern. And I don't want to be in a position of talking about laying off people or cutting their salaries when we have revenues out there that can support this government that we haven't collected. I think that's something important for us to think about. The governor, I think, should recognize, and a lot of the people in this community should recognize, that if they examine the record, in many, many instances, the governor has gotten exactly what he has asked for. His nominees have been confirmed, whether they be judges or nominees to boards. He got the Hovenza agreement, despite the fact that it was rejected once. He came back, it was passed again. So I think that underscores the willingness of the legislature to work with the executive branch and to provide the support that's necessary for us to work our way through economic crises. But I think we have to be very careful that we approach the situation with the recognition that the legislature is an independent branch of government, and we have a responsibility to the people who elect us to ensure that the choices that we make don't impact them more adversely than necessary. I think we ought to move very carefully with that regard.
Do you think that the conversation between the legislature and the governor after the budget shortfall hearing will be productive?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. But I also think that I would have liked to hear the governor talk about, more specifically, the delegate, her involvement in addressing this rum cover over monies, because that is presented as a significant element in the shortfall, one, and that we also have lobbyists that we pay to lobby on our behalf in Washington, D.C. And if this is a significant item of the budget shortfall, I think the efforts that we needed to make or need to make will have to have more and active participation by those entities involved.
All right, thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you, Saida. Joining me is Senator Clifford Graham, Chairman for the Committee on Finance. How are you tonight?
I am great. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. Let's talk about the $70 million shortfall. What incentives or initiatives do you think will help to close that budget gap?
Well, first of all, the governor is talking about the $70.6 million in budget deficit, but we got to remember about $36 million of that will come by way of the rum cover over when Congress do in fact act on the extenders. I'm very optimistic that this is something that will be done, and Interior may give us the advancement and at least true up with us at the end of the fiscal year. But with respect to the remaining budget deficit, I think the administration has a tool or arsenal in their capability that they can do and go out there and collect some of the issues that they need to collect to bridge some of this gap. For example, I know internet gaming is something that was already passed by the legislature. We were the first place under the U.S. flag to come up with internet gaming. It was challenged, but when it went all the way to the highest court, we prevailed and we can move forward with internet gaming. Yet 3 states already with internet gaming, and we still haven't come off of first base with internet gaming. When you look in terms of the fiscal year 14 revenues that came in for October, November, December, yes, it is true that all categories are down with the exception of one category, and that's property taxes. Property taxes is showing a slight increase. We have actually collected like $12.6 million in property taxes, and that property tax is from the 2012 property tax that went out late last fiscal year. Some of that spilled over into this fiscal year. Now, the administration requested from the 30th Legislature, and we granted the administration wish to send the property tax bill out for the same calendar year that you're in, meaning that 2014 property tax bill can go out this year for the same 2014 that we're in. We approved that. That means that 2013 calendar year property tax bill will go out along with the 2014 property tax bill. Now, we got $12.6 million that came in from the 2012. That was not earmarked or projected in the budget because the budget has $105 million. That's for 13 and 14 property tax. Now, you can practically say that January is over. The end of this week, January is gone. So that means we're into February next week. The 2013 property tax bill has not gone out as yet. Even if you send it out on February 1, you're going to allow an opportunity to collect those taxes 5 to 6 months. If you wait 6 months for that, when will the 14 property tax bill go out? In August or September? Then how realistic it is that you will collect all of that $52 million before the end of the fiscal year. So yes, the governor is talking about deficit, but there are things in your arsenal, in his arsenal, that he can do to really ensure that we collect in certain areas to compensate for the areas that we're down. In the speech, the governor talked about some merchants that he know some merchants are charging in St. Martin and Africah. Yesterday, we didn't hear no solution as we're cracking down on you and we're going to do an investigation or whatever. All he said is, yes, we're aware of it.
So the governor spoke about a lot of issues tonight. He spoke about the federal consent decree for police and correction officers as well as education. But do you think he talked about enough solutions to resolve some of these problems?
I certainly don't think so, because if you look at the areas where we have federal oversight, we have the federal oversight in the Virgin Island Housing Authority under receivership. We have the third party fiduciary in the Department of Education. We have the consent decree at correction for some 15 years or something like that. We have the consent decree at VIPD for 10 years now and growing. And as, he just touched a little bit on all of those, and he didn't offer any whole solution as to where we're going. The only one he really mentioned is that he approved advisory board for housing authority in hopes that he get it out of receivership. But he really didn't talk about the consent decree at police and correction or Department of Education, third party fiduciary, and how what he's doing to do to resolve those issues. And I think when you look in terms of a governor that's been in for 7 years now and he's in his 8th year, I was looking for more answers to some of these problems.
Is there anything else the governor did not mention tonight that you would have liked him to address in his speech?
Well, certainly. The governor did not talk about homelessness. And if you look at what's happening, especially here in the capital, Charlotte, I mean, we have a lot, the homeless population, to me, it has been increasing. And I think he missed an opportunity to talk about what he's going to do or what he's doing to really reduce the amount of homeless people here that sleep in on the Emancipation Garden, sleeping downtown, sleeping in some of these bus stops and stuff like that. I look at opportunities that when we look at the Market Square area. We just completed renovation in the Market Square area, and then we put a fence around the Market Square area to really deal with the homeless population. So now no one can use the Market Square area. We have merchants on a Saturday morning up here by Emancipation Garden, and rightfully they should be at the Market Square area, but there's a fence around it to deal with one problem. You know, to me, the solution is not putting up a fence to deal with the homelessness. Is to really roll out your programs and initiatives to really get homeless people off of the street, rehabilitated into everyday life here in the territory.
Thank you, Senator. Saida?
It's positive, Nelson. The governor spoke a lot about revenue generation here in the territory, but he didn't really touch on agricultural efforts. Do you think this would be an opportunity for you to talk about your marijuana laws?
Oh, well, it's interesting that you do bring that up. I do believe as we talk about revenue generation that, yes, we need to seriously consider what's going on in the marijuana industry. I also do want to point out that I've sent to my colleagues for their consideration something I've titled the Virgin Islands Infrastructure Reconstruction Plan. It's an economic recovery plan. So I do believe there's a way out, but it starts with us being honest with each other and just fully disclosing what it is we really want to do and to have a heart for the people. And in short, my interpretation of the governor's speech basically says we're in a worse predicament than he left us, and it's up to us to dig ourselves out. And we can do it, however, and we just have to put our wheel to the shoulder, our shoulder to the wheel now, and get it going. I feel that most of the governor's speech is saying what he's planning to do, but he's in his last year. First of all, I'm grateful, I'm glad that this is his last year, that this is his last state of the territory. I think year in, year out, we've heard these speeches of what he's going to do, and now in his last year, he's still telling us what he's planning to do for the future. He has not accomplished many of the tasks, and most of the initiatives that were sent to the legislature were tax increases, which would have increased the cost of living on the working men and women in the territory and on small businesses, while at the same time we're very much still willing to give tax leniencies and waivers to those who can most afford it. Likewise, they've been talking about increasing taxes when they've been reluctant to collect taxes out on the streets. So for those who can also afford it. So I take these speeches with a grain of salt, and I do believe it's a lot of talk, and there's real no sincere effort. To me, he's just writing it out till the end of his last year and hoping that, and maybe not, just leaving it all for whomever takes over to pick up the pieces. The good thing about it is, since all of us are not going to run and leave, we will have to pick the pieces up. And I do believe if we were to pursue this Virgin Islands Infrastructure Reconstruction Plan, the concept is rather simple. Borrow money, to refinance our bond indentures against the Public Finance Authority. Also pay off WAPA's bond. You'll decrease electricity rates right away, and you will have some monies to pursue some well-needed infrastructure repairs and put people to work repairing our infrastructure. That's what President Obama is saying now, and that's what I've been saying all along. And they're still bragging about the Diageo deal, but part of the half of the deficit, as he stated, is from the withholding from the federal government of the extension to the 1325. This is the first time they've ever done that. Let's ask ourselves why. It's because they have concerns with the deal we struck relative to Diageo. And I'm hopeful that it pans out for those who voted in favor of Hovensa, that Hovensa does open back. But from the way things look, I don't think we're going to see Hovensa being reopened through 2014. So, I am willing to work with the governor. I'm willing to work with my colleagues. But I think we have to pursue initiatives, and if we're going to borrow this time, let's borrow on the people's behalf. We've borrowed for everybody else. It's about time we borrow on the people's behalf, and we can't keep sending people home, not frontline workers. If we are going to send people home, let's look at sending some of the management staff home. We have too many layers of administrative personnel in government, and if we're really going to fix our problem, we have to know that we cannot reduce the workforce, the frontline workers where the rubber really meets the road. I think he does not, and he's proven, in my view, to not understand the economy nor the people who he's been elected to represent.
Now, being that this was his 8th and final State of the Territory address, are you walking away with a sense of urgency based on the things that he said and hasn't done?
Well, I'm not getting a sense of urgency from him, but I've been in a sense of urgency mode now for the past 5 years or so, because all when they were borrowing money to give to Diageo, I was crying out at the time that this money needs to go into our infrastructure, in particular our utilities infrastructure. So there is a sense of urgency. We are at critical mass. Did I get it from him? No. What I got from him is, hey guys, sorry I made a bigger mess. Hopefully you can get it fixed. He said it squarely. I put it at the foot of the legislature. They sent down an unbalanced budget. And they smile at that. And now they're saying as though the legislature did not pass their initiatives, but their initiatives, if anybody looked at their initiatives, it would have increased taxes on the poor people of this territory. So I support the legislature in rejecting his proposals, and I do believe that with a closer look, we can see the need to probably relieve ourselves of some of those consulting contracts until a better time is here. And that's what makes it sad, because he's unwilling to touch those individuals whom have been blessed or favored, and is so willing to, and again, he's talking about the 8% cut. He's so willing to go back at the small working men and women who are struggling to make ends meet, and I can't support any such initiative. So, Governor is on his way out. We're here to work, and I'm hopeful that my colleagues can agree with me that there's merit to the Virgin Islands Infrastructure Reconstruction Plan, and let's turn this thing around. I am a little concerned about monies coming in under this administration, because we've seen they borrowed over $1 billion, and we've seen that all gone for naught. We haven't seen the improvement in our economy. And if I was to really grade his accomplishment, he'll be at a C minus to a D. And if it's one thing I want the governor to answer for us, in 2007, when he was found in violation of law, when he used $500,000 on his private home, he said he was going to pay it back when he's leaving office. Well, Governor, you're leaving office. I want you to pay that money back, because just like you stated on page 17, when people do things wrong, you're going to pursue them, arrest them, and prosecute them. Well, it should go for everybody.
Thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you very much.
I'm Saida Harrigan.
For Legit TV.
Thanks.